Greetings, people who probably clicked on this video by mistake. This is my channel, Scale Phrase, and over the past many years, I've been presenting grammar innovations, ideas that I came up with a long time ago. And in the past few years, I've been presenting these ideas. I want to get them out there before I die because I think some of them are pretty good. So here's a list of some of the concepts or studies or little topics that I worked on. This is not comprehensive, but it's a quick list. And I'd like to introduce today another one. But before I do, I have to do a preface so I can tell you how I got there. In previous videos, I talked about the clause, and I won't go into great detail, but I talked about the clause, and I determined that we have the subject, predicate, we have the dependent clause, independent clause, and you can find this all over the internet. You can study this on your own. You could pause this video and read this to understand where my mind was when I was working on this new idea. Then I determined that the independent clause is actually genuine, and the dependent clause is actually synthetic. In other words, in my mind, I realized that the genuine clause is a complete clause. There is nothing in this clause that disqualifies it from being complete. It is not dependent on or subordinate to anything outside itself. Then I call the dependent clause synthetic because the adjective synthetic means involving parts that combine to form a whole. A synthetic clause must be joined to something, and that's a genuine clause. The synthetic clause cannot stand alone. So in my mind, I clearly understood what clauses I was dealing with, and I gave them names that I can relate to comfortably. That way I could move forward with this new idea. Then I studied the elliptical clause. The elliptical clause is actually kind of like an elliptical sentence. It's not complete. In other words, something has been omitted. You can pause this page and study it, and that way I won't have to go on and on. But here's an example. Here's an elliptical sentence or clause versus a complete sentence. Here's the elliptical. Anger and disappointment were among the feelings the mayor expressed. Now that's elliptical. In other words, something has been omitted. And here's the complete thought. Anger and disappointment were among the feelings that the mayor expressed. You see, in the elliptical version, the word that was omitted, and that's okay. That's the way people talk. But you can see, though, that essentially one of these is not entirely complete, and one is as complete as reason will allow it to be. Now here's another sample. Excuse me. She likes ice cream more than me. Now that's the elliptical version, but the person speaking or writing could be saying she likes ice cream more than she likes me, or she could be saying she likes ice cream more than I like ice cream. So you have to see from the context, you have to kind of feel what the meaning is. Of course, ordinarily, when you're with a speaker and you're the listener, the audience, you kind of know what the speaker is saying. And here's more examples. You can pause this page and study it on your own. Save a little time here. And then finally, we realize that when speaking or writing informally, the use of elliptical clauses will ordinarily suffice. However, for formal or professional writing, the overuse of elliptical clauses might make the speaker and or writer sound lazy or illiterate. And illiterate meaning violating approved patterns of speaking or writing. So ordinarily, you can speak either way, but people do tend to speak elliptically because they know that their audience understands what he or she is saying. Okay? So you can study that on your own to save time. Now we get to this. This is the new thing. This is one of my new innovations. The absolute phrase. If you go on the internet, you can find hundreds and hundreds of videos that talk about this thing, and they call it the absolute phrase. All right? So I looked at it. I looked at it deeply. I studied, and I thought about it. And let me go into detail here. Of all the terms used in the English language, the term absolute phrase is arguably the worst. It is at the least inaccurate and confusing. Granted, it is indeed a phrase, a group of related words that lacks either a subject or a predicate, or both. But beyond that, there's nothing absolute about it. The word absolute, from the Latin absolutus, means free or set free. The only thing free about the absolute phrase could conceivably be the liberties taken by the writers who habitually use it, or maybe the fact that the subject of the participle is free to not be the subject of the main verb. See, the subject of this participle and this participle, there's two of them, is not the subject of your genuine clause or your independent clause, right? This is what I call it, a genuine clause. That's my new term. So you see here in our sample sentence that you have a noun or a pronoun plus a participle, and sometimes, not always, you'll have modifiers. And that's what the whole world calls the absolute phrase. You'll see this all over the internet, and no one on the internet will tell you what I'm about to tell you. Now here's an example of an absolute structure versus the original. Okay, in this sentence is an absolute phrase. The election obviously rigged. The voters were greatly disappointed. The election obviously rigged is your absolute phrase. All right. Now, in the original sentence in your mind, in your inherent deep grammar, your mind would ordinarily be thinking in its fullest form. One of these two examples. The election was obviously rigged, semicolon. The voters were greatly disappointed. Okay, that's how you could say it or think it. And you see here in this absolute phrase, the word was omitted. Now here's another way of saying it completely or originally. Realizing that the election was obviously rigged, the voters were greatly disappointed. So set up this way or this way, these are complete sentences. Nothing's missing, nothing was omitted. Here's two more examples. I won't go on and on. You can pause the video and study these. But the point I'm making is you will hear this. You'll hear this talked about all over the internet in hundreds and hundreds of videos, and they will not tell you what I'm about to tell you. I showed you my first example. This particular absolute phrase happens to have two participles, but it only needs one, and sometimes there's modifiers. So we looked at this example, and then we looked at three more examples, sentences with the absolute phrase versus what could possibly be the original thought, all right? Now we move along, and we discover, if we really look at it and really study, that the absolutely worst phrase is the absolute phrase. Let's again look at our example from above. The guards stoned and drunk. The prisoners easily escaped. Here's your absolute phrase, that's what they call it. And here's your genuine or independent clause, okay? This clause here can stand by itself. Now this is what we are told by grammar books and grammar websites. The absolute phrase modifies the entire sentence in which it occurs. Okay, that is false. This absolute phrase does not modify the entire sentence for two reasons. First of all, because logically it doesn't, and second of all, it's part of the sentence. The absolute phrase adds detail to the sentence. Well, almost any phrase in any sentence adds detail, so that's no big thing. The absolute phrase clarifies the meaning of the sentence. Well, slightly, maybe slightly to a degree, but that's not always true. The absolute phrase explains the sentence. Well, sometimes a little bit, but not entirely. And then some people will say all different things like the absolute phrase enhances the sentence, which isn't really saying much because anything you put in a sentence, you inject, is going to enhance it in some way. So all that's what we were told by grammar books and all the other websites out there. Now, this is what is actually true about the absolute phrase. This is what I'm telling you. The absolute phrase is elliptical. All right, elliptical. Words are omitted. Words are omitted, yet the meaning of the phrase is ordinarily still clear. The meaning is understood in context. Most people would read this and after a second or two would say, okay, I get it. The absolute phrase and the elliptical clause, all right, function in like manner. They could be viewed, conceivably, as grammatical cousins. The absolute phrase is synthetic. It must be joined to a genuine clause. All right, we move forward. Now we have to ask, at least if you have a curious mind, we have to ask, but what really is this so-called absolute phrase? What does it categorically really do? And why is it named as such? Well, I'll tell you. The absolute phrase in reality is actually a condition phrase. That's right. That's correct. It's a condition phrase. And despite what you hear on all those other videos and all those grammar books, they are not good. It's crappy. What exactly is a condition phrase? A condition phrase is an elliptical, synthetic word phrase. In other words, elliptical words are obviously omitted, all right? Synthetic, it cannot stand alone, and it doesn't. So what exactly does it do? What does it do? It has one function and one only. The condition phrase describes the condition that exists during the action of the genuine clause. Here's our example again. The guards stoned and drunk, the prisoners easily escaped. This is a condition phrase. This is not an absolute phrase. This is a horrible name. This is worse than relative pronoun. What a crappy name that I got rid of. I got rid of it. It's a condition phrase. It describes the condition that exists during the action of the genuine clause. Here's your genuine clause. That's what you would call an independent clause. The prisoners easily escaped. Okay, here's what happened. The prisoners easily escaped. It's a fact. It's a genuine clause. It's a thought in itself. Well, what was the condition? What was going on when the prisoners easily escaped? The condition here was the guards were stoned and drunk out of their minds. Right here, this is simply stating a condition. The term absolute phrase, that's the old term, tells us virtually nothing meaningful about the phrase itself. The name condition phrase is superior, as you can see, and it will certainly make more sense to new students. And I stand by this. This is yet another one of my ideas, and I thought I better throw it out before I drop over dead. But the absolute phrase is a fake. It's a fraud. There's no reason to use the word absolute. Maybe 100 years ago, yeah, that was a good term. Maybe 200 years ago, but not now, not anymore. It's a condition phrase. You will not hear this anywhere else, only here, and this is the superior term. This shouldn't be allowed to be used anymore. I can't emphasize that enough. So that's it. We will add that to my list of innovations, and then we'll move on from there. So thanks for being incredibly patient, and hope to see you soon.